Hi everyone, good day. Welcome again to your ITEP 203 synchronous class. So, our lesson for today is on Module 5, which is entitled Discrete and Continuous Random Variables. For this lesson, we will be talking about the first part, which is discrete random variables. So, on your day 1, you had your asynchronous Module 5 self-study. On day 2 is your synchronous class for Module 5 Part 1 and Engagement Activity 5. Your task performance 5, isusunod ko na lang or isasabay ko na lang sa Part 2. So what are the objectives of this lesson? So una, for you to be able to learn the concept of a random variable, to learn the distinction between discrete and continuous random variables, and then also the concept of the probability distribution of a discrete random variable, and also the concept of a binomial random variable and how to recognize a random variable as being a binomial random variable. So these are the objectives for part 1. The content of my lecture are the following. Una, ano ba yung random variable? Ano-ano yung mga types nito? Ano yung discrete probability distribution? Paano gumawa ng discrete probability distribution? Ano yung binomial distribution? And ano yung probability formula for a binomial random variable? And also, lastly, the cumulative probability distribution of a binomial random variable. So, ano ba yung random variable? Ang random variable, ito ay numerical quantity that is generated by a random experiment. When you say random experiment, ito yung experiment, trial, or observation that can be repeated numerous times under the same conditions. Maybe you are recognizing these terminologies kasi napag-aralan natin to sa ating lesson about probability. So, ano ba yung examples ng random variables? So, una, one form or one experiment could be rolling 2 fair dice, where the number x is the sum of the number of dots on the top faces, and therefore, the possible values of x is 2, 3, 4, 5, hanggang 12. So, another example na meron dito is flipping a fair coin repeatedly. So, the number of tosses under the coin lands heads is the x. Okay, so yung possible values of x is 1, 2, 3, kung ilan yung number of toss until yung coin ay magland sa head. Tapos, yung pangatlong example dito is the measure the voltage at an electric outlet. So, yun yung ating third example. So, yung x is the voltage measured, where the possible values of x is a number from 118 up to 122. Another type of experiment or random experiment, yung last example dyan, is to operate a light bulb until it burns out. So, yung x mo is the time until the bulb burns out. So, the possible values of x is 0 to infinity. Okay, so a random variable is called discrete kung ito ay either a finite or a countable number of possible values. Continuous naman kung yung possible values contain a whole interval of numbers. So, meron siyang mga decimal points. The examples in the table are typical in that discrete random variables. Typically arises from a counting process. So, pag binibilang mo, you will know that that is a discrete random variable. While yung continuous random variables naman, ito ay nanggagaling kapag mineasure mo yung isang bagay. So, if you measured something, then it has a tendency to have decimal point. So, by that time, malalaman mo na ito ay continuous random variable. So, ano ba yung uri ng random variable? So, nabanggit ko na to kanina. Yung isang uri ay discrete random variable, yung isa naman is continuous random variable. So, ano ba yung discrete random variable? Ang discrete random variable is within a range of numbers. Discrete variables can only take on certain values. So, we have here examples. Number of students present, the number of red marbles in a jar, the number of heads when flipping 3 coins, and students' grade level. So, ito, na-achieve mo to by counting process. Okay? At yung result dyan ay wala tayong decimal point, yung number na rin-represent nito. Kung yung x is our examples, then our x will not have a value that has a decimal point. Ayun naman yung pagkakaiba sa continuous random variable. Ang continuous random variable, it can take on any value within a range of values. Example, if x, halimbawa, is the height of students in class, weight of students in class, time it takes to get to school, and distance traveled between classes. So, kung mapapansin mo, itong mga examples na to, you can get this using measurement if you measure something. Now, let's talk about the discrete probability distributions. So, associated to each possible value x of a discrete random variable x is the probability that x will take the value small letter x in one trial of the experiment. So, napag-aralan na natin to dun sa lesson natin about probability. Yung probability distribution ng discrete random variable x is a list of each possible value of x together with the probability that x takes that value in one trial of the experiment. So, the probabilities in the probability distribution of a random variable x must satisfy the following conditions. Okay, so yung each probability must be between 0 and 1. Okay, so napag-aralan na natin to dun sa lesson natin na ang probability is a number between 0 to 1. Okay, and then the sum of all probabilities is 1. So, to get the formula, so here is the formula for the probability of a discrete random variable. So, the formula is the number of wanted outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. So, let me give you an example. So, an example would be a fair coin is tossed twice. Let x be the number of heads that are observed. So, meron ka daw na coin na tinos ng 2 beses. Yung x mo, okay, yung value ng x mo is the number of heads that are observed. So, ilang beses ba pwede na yung heads ay lumabas when you toss a coin? Okay, so yun yung ating hinahanap. So, we want to do two things. Construct the probability distribution of x, and then find the probability that at least one head is observed. So, in this case, alam naman natin na it's either 0, yung x, hindi lumabas yung heads. Pwede rin namang isang beses. Pwede rin namang 2 beses lumabas yung heads. So, gusto nating tingnan or mag-construct ng probability distribution ng x. Kung ito ay 0, 1, or 2. Tapos, gusto nating kuhanin yung probability na at least one head yung lumabas. So, here's the solution. So, sabi ko nga sa inyo, yung possible values ng x can take are 0, 1, and 2. 0, ibig sabihin, 2 tails yung lumabas dun sa 2 coin tosses mo. 1, ibig sabihin, yung isa ay tails, ang isa naman ay heads. Tapos yung isa naman, parehong heads yung lumabas. So, we have here the sample space. The sample space is that you get 2 heads. Okay, so you get 2 heads. You get 1 head. The first one is head and the second one is tail. So, yun yung pwede maging scenario. The first one is tail and the second one is head. That's the third scenario. And then the last scenario would be 2 tails. Okay, so yun yung sample space natin of equally likely outcomes for this experiment. X is equal to 0 to, if you have 2 tails. X is equal to 1 if you have 1 head. So, meron tayo dyang dalawa. Tapos, x is equal to 2 if you have 2 heads. So, the total number of possible outcomes is, obviously, it's 4. So, you have to list it all down to get your sample space. So, now let's compute the probability of getting 0 head or where x is equal to 0. So, if x is equal to 0, the probability of getting 0 is 1 over 4. Why? Because you have 1 chance over 4 of getting 0 heads. Okay, so isa lang yung scenario. So, you have 1/4 or 0.25. Now, let's try to compute the probability of getting 1 head or x is equal to 1. So, if the formula is the number of wanted outcomes versus over the number of possible outcomes, then getting 1 head, we have 2 scenarios for that. This 2. Itong dalawa. Okay, so ibig sabihin, that is 2 over 4. So, for probability where x is equal to 1, that is 1/2 or 0.5 or 0.50. Now, let's compute for the probability of getting 2. This is the third scenario, where x, ibig sabihin nun, x is equal to 2. So, the probability of getting 2 is only 1 over 4 or 0.25 kasi out of the 4 scenarios natin, isa lang over 4 ang 2 heads. So, the probability of getting 2 heads is only 1 over 4 or 0.25. So, here's how you do the probability distribution of x. So, you will put the possible values of x here at the top of the table. So, that is 0, 1, and 2. And then, the corresponding probability for each scenario, which is what we compute a while ago. So, for 0 heads, that is 0.25. For 1 head, that is higher, 0.50. While for 2 heads, that is 0.25. So, this is how you do the probability distribution of x. This is a table, the table for our probability distribution. Now, you can also show probability using histogram. You can also show the probability distribution using this type of graph. This type of graph is called histogram. So, you will just put here the possible values of x, so 0, 1, and 2, and then the probability here at your y-axis. On your x-axis, the possible values of x, while on your y-axis is your probability. So, if x is 0, so you have 0.25. If x is 1, then you have 0.50. If x is 2, then you have 0.25. If you add all of this, then the sum should be 1. Okay, now it's your turn. So what's the probability that you will get at least 1 head? So that includes x is equal to 1 and x is equal to 2. So therefore, this is our condition. If x is greater than or equal to 1, then what is the probability? So try to answer this. Okay, so the answer is you have to combine your probability if x is 1 and probability if x is 2. So the probability, the first probability is 0.50 while the second probability is 0.25. So if you're going to add them, the probability if x is greater than or equal to 1 is 0.75. Okay, so here's the second example. A pair of fair dice is rolled. Let x denote the sum of the number of dots on the top faces. So, pinag-add daw yung pag-roll mo ng first die at pag-roll mo ng second die kung ano yung nasa yung lumabas na number. So, ito yung mga kukunin natin. We have to construct the probability distribution of x, yung kaninang table. Tapos, pangalawa is to find the probability where x is greater than or equal to 9. And then also, find the probability that x takes an even value. Okay, so paano kaya ito? So here are the possible results of rolling pair dice. here. So, pwedeng 1 yung lumabas dun sa una, tas 1 ulit, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. Ito yung possible outcomes. So, we have a total of 36 outcomes. So, therefore, yung sample space natin ay yung mga pinag-add na value nitong lahat ng 36 outcomes. So, we have here 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, pag in-add mo yan, 7, tapos 3, 4, 5, and so on. So, ngayon, kapag sinort natin yung 36 items sa sample space natin, ito yung kalalabasan. So, pinakabababa yung 2, pinakamataas yung 12, kung dalawang 6. Okay, so the total number of outcomes ay 36. So, ito yung table for our probability distribution. So, kung 2 yung value natin, so meron tayo dyang, ito yung mga unique values. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Yung sum nung 2 dice, yung top face. So, yung 2, yung value ng 2 ay isa lang over 36. Yung 3 ay 2 over 36 kasi meron tayo dyang dalawa. Yung 4 ay 3 over 36 or 1 over 12. And then yung 5 is 4 over 36 and so on. So, bibilangan mo lang siyang lahat. Tapos, ilalagay mo sa iyong probability table yung corresponding value. Okay? So, kapag pinag-add mo yan lahat, itong probability sa baba, you will get a total of 1 or 36 over 36. So, ito yung ating solution dun sa una nating gustong kuhanin. Ito yung probability distribution. And the final answer, by the way, should be yung kanyang simplest form. Okay? Dun sa pinakang natin, fraction. Okay, so sunod, yung B naman. Gusto naman natin kunin yung probability if x is greater than or equal to 9. Ibig sabihin, itong lahat ng to, yung value mo. So, you have to add all of them, right? So, by intuition, that's what you want to do. If that is 9 is less than or equal to, if x is less than or equal to 9, then itong lahat. Pero dahil ang hinahanap natin is the value that is greater than, so itong lahat, itong to. Okay, from 9 hanggang 12. So, the event x is greater than or equal to 9 is the union of the mutually exclusive events x is equal to 9, x is equal to 10, x is equal to 11, and x is equal to 12. So, ano kaya yung probability natin? Ano kaya yung kalalabasan? So, tingnan nyo. Take a look at this. So, what would be the answer? Okay, so you just have to add 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. So, ilan yan lahat? So, 1 plus 2 is 6, plus 3, 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10. So, we have 10 over 36 or 5 over 18, right? So, ito yung ating probability. 10 over 36 or 0.27. So, that's how you get the value given na ito yung ating kinukuha. Now again, it's your turn. Before we immediately jump to the conclusion that the probability that x takes an even value must be 0.5, note that x takes 6 different even values but only 5 different odd values. Okay, so here's the probability. So ipag-add mo lang yung P2, P4, P6, P8, P10, tsaka P12 kasi gusto mong kuhanin yung total probability if x is even. So, ipag-add mo lang siya, you will get 18 over 36 or 0.5. Now, if x is odd, then pag-add mo lang yung yung odd numbers. Okay, so kunin mo siya dito sa table mo. Lahat ng odd numbers, tapos i-add mo yung kanyang probability. So, that's how you do it. So, here's the histogram for our example number 2. So, meron kang value, lahat ng possible values ng x, which is 2 hanggang 12, tapos yung corresponding probability sa x-axis. Okay, so this is our histogram for that. Okay, now let's talk about binomial distribution. Okay, so when you say binomial distribution, binomial, a random variable rather, so it should come from binomial random variable. So, ano ba yung sinasabing binomial random variable? So, ito yung mga characteristics ng binomial random variable. Una, there are n identical and independent trials of a common procedure. Pangalawa, there are exactly two possible outcomes for each trial. One termed success and the other failure. Okay, ano yung pangatlong characteristic? Malalaman mo na ito ay binomial random variable kung yung probability of success of any one trial is the same number p. Okay, so you have two possible values, success or failure. So the probability of success is 0.5 or 1/2, and the probability of failure is 1/2 also. So here's our example. Tossing a fair coin 3 times and observing the genders according to birth order of the children in a randomly selected 3-child family. Okay, so pareho lang sila ng probability distribution kasi halos pareho lang sila ng scenario. Okay, so tossing a fair coin 3 times, ayan, so the probability, the value could be, halimbawa, ang kinukuha natin is the probability of P being head. Okay, so yung 0 head, 1 head, 2 heads, and 3 heads, ito yung probability niya. Yun naman pangalawa, if X is yung gender, male or female. Okay, so ito rin yung kanyang probability. Kung ilan yung female, halimbawa yung X is female or X is male. So, pwedeng 0 lahat yung female, ibig sabihin lahat ay male, 1 yung female, tapos ibig sabihin nun, dalawa yung ating male, dalawa yung female, so isa lang yung male, tapos tatlong female. Ibig sabihin 0 yung male. So, ayun yung na-represent ng X dito. So, the probability of getting the value of X are the following. Okay, so ayan. Okay, so all you have to do is to list all of their sample spaces and then tingnan mo yung mga scenarios na yan. Okay, so makikita mo, ito talaga yung corresponding probability value. So, malalaman mo na ito ay binomial random variable kung each trial has only 2 outcomes. Heads or tails dito sa first example natin, tapos dun sa second example natin is boy or girl. Tapos, yung probability of success is the same number, 0.5 or 1/2 on every trial. Okay, on every trial, meron ka lang 2 possibilities. So, the random variable that is generated is called the binomial random variable. So, ano yung parameters natin? N is equal to 3 or the total number of trials. So, you have 3 times 3-child family. So, N is equal to 3. While the P or the probability is 0.5 for each trial. Okay, so here is the histogram for our 2 examples. Kung yung 0, yung 1, so lahat ng possible values ng X, tapos yung probability dito sa Y-axis. So, gawin mo lang siya, i-plot mo lang siya. Okay, so here's another example. A random sample of 125 students is selected from a large college in which the proportion of students who are females is 57%. Suppose X denotes the number of female students in the sample. So, dito daw sa sample natin. 57 yung females, yung proportion. So, in this situation, there are 125 identical and independent trials of a common procedure. So, our first indicator that this is a binomial random variable. Selecting a student at random. Okay, so, pumili ka daw ng estudyante at random. There are exactly 2 possible outcomes for each trial. Success, what we are counting that the student be female, and failure if male yung nakuha natin. And finally, the probability of success on any one trial is the same. So, the probability is 0.57. Okay, so kada trial mo, yun pa din yung probability mo kasi 57% yung females. X is a binomial random variable with parameters. N is equal to 125 kasi meron tayong 125 identical and independent trials of a common procedure. Okay, so ibig sabihin, yun yung trials natin. Tapos yung probability natin is 0.75. So again, each trial has two outcomes. It's either boy or girl, and the probability of success is the same number, 0.57 on every trial. So the random variable that is generated is a binomial random variable with the parameters n is equal to 125 and p having the value of 0.57. Okay, here is another example. An experimental medication was given to 30 patients with a certain medical condition. Suppose X denotes the number of patients who develop severe side effects. X is a binomial random variable with n is equal to 30 while p is equal to the true probability that a patient with the underlying condition will experience severe side effects if given that medication. So, supposed to be dapat meron siyang value ng p or probability. Okay, now let's talk about the probability formula for a binomial random variable. So, ano ba yung probability formula natin? Kung yung x natin is a binomial random variable with parameters n and p, so here is our formula. The probability of getting x is equivalent to n factorial over x factorial times n minus x factorial multiplied by p raised to the value of x and q raised to the value of n minus x. So, ano ba yung q natin? Yung q natin, ito yung 1 minus the probability. Okay, so ito yung value ng q natin. Where for any counting number m factorial is defined by, so ito yung ating, ganito natin i-solve yung ating factorial. Kung 0 factorial yan, automatic, ang value niya is 1. Kung 1 factorial, so 1 then. Kapag 2 factorial, 1 times 2. Kapag 3 factorial, 1 times 2 times 3. Kapag 4 factorial, that is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. Okay, so that's how you solve factorials. Okay, so you have to be familiar with this formula. So, ito yung sample problem natin. So, 17% of victims of financial fraud know the perpetrator of the fraud personally. Use the formula to construct the probability distribution for the number x of people in a random sample of 5 victims of financial fraud who knew the perpetrator for personally. So, lahat daw ng nabibiktima ng financial fraud, 17% sa kanila ay kilala nila yung perpetrator or yung nang victimize sa kanila. So, ngayon, pinapagawa tayo ng probability distribution na kung saan ay meron tayong 5 victims and then gusto nating malaman kung ano yung probability for each, for the 5 trials or for the 5 victims, kung kilala ba nila yung perpetrator or hindi. And then the second one, an investigator examines 5 cases of financial fraud every day. Find the most frequent number of cases each day in which the victim knew the perpetrator. So, let's answer our first problem. So, the random variable x is a binomial with parameters n is equal to 5 kasi meron tayong 5 victims dun sa ating problem. Ayan. So, 5 victims. And then, p natin is 0.17 kasi ay 17% yung kilala nila yung perpetrator sa lahat ng fraud na nangyayari. Therefore, our q is 1 minus p, so that is 0.83. The possible values of x are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so walang na-victimize. Isa yung na-victimize, 2, 3, 4, 5 yung na-victimize. So, to get the P0, all you have to do is to i-convert mo yung mga values mo sa ating formula. So, makukuha mo yung P0 is equivalent to 0.3939. Yung P1 naman, kapag kinonvert mo siya sa formula, ang makukuha mo na value is 0.4034. Kapag P2 is 0.1652. So, the remaining 3 possibilities are computed similarly. So, lahat. So, yung 3, 4, tsaka yung 5, gawin mo lang. And then, you will get this, the probabilities. So, if it's 0, Then, ilagay mo yung probability sa baba na na-compute mo. If it's 1, lagay mo rin sa baba, and so on. Okay, so ito na yung iyong solution dun sa iyong first problem. All you have to do is to know your values, to know what's given, alin dun yung n, alin dun yung p, and then i-convert mo lang siya dun sa formula, tapos gawa ka ng probability distribution. Okay, so remember that x can take 6 values, not 5, kasi merong 0 or walang victim that day. So here's our histogram. All you have to do is to put all the possible values of x and then the probability here. So that's how complicated this probability table is to be converted into a histogram. But it's easy kung automated yung magagawa ng histogram. Okay, so yung second naman natin na question, yung value of x that is most likely is x is equal to 1. So the most frequent number of cases seen each day in which the victim knew the perpetrator is 1. So kasi yung 1 yung ating pinakang mataas. Okay, so yun yung frequent number of cases seen each day in which the victim knew the perpetrator. Okay, so kapag isa daw yung nagreklamo, yung victim for that day, malamang kilala niya. Kapag dalawa, ito na yung probability. Kapag tatlo yung victim that day, kapag apat yung victim that day, ayan yung probability na kilala niya yung perpetrator. So that's how it works. Ngayon, paano ba gawin ito sa Excel, yung binomial probability? All you have to do is to use the binom dist formula having these parameters apat. So, x, yung value ng x yung kinukuha mo. So, ito yung number na 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 dun sa example natin. So, kahit alin dun sa values na yun, ilagay dito. Yung n is the number of trials, which is 5. Yung p is 0.17. Tapos yung cum naman, it can take the value of true or false. True siya kung cumulative probability yung hinahanap mo. Not false siya kung hindi cumulative probability. So, sa ating example, dapat siya ay false kasi hindi naman cumulative probability yung hinahanap natin. So, ito yung ating Excel formula. If P is equal to 1, binom dist 1, so ito yung X, 5, the N, 0.17 which is our P or probability, and false kasi ay hindi naman cumulative probability yung hinahanap natin. Tapos, palitan mo lang yung value ng X natin hanggang 5, ito yung ating result. Kung mapapansin mo, same siya dun sa ating table. Okay? Tapos, pag pinag-add mo lahat ng probability dito, that would be equivalent to 1. Okay, so that's it for our binomial probability. Now, let's talk about the cumulative probability distribution of a binomial random variable. Ang cumulative probability distribution ay depende sa condition, ipag-add mo lang kung ano yung value na hinahanap mo. Okay? So, ipag-add mo lang. Halimbawa, ang hinahanap mo is x is less than or equal to x, then itong lahat ng nasa kaliwa, ipag-add mo. Kapag naman greater than, kung alin man dyan yung x mo, yun yung lalabas. So, kapag ganito yung situation, itong mga probabilities na yan, i-add niya yan lahat. Okay? For if you're getting a cumulative probability distribution. All you have to do is to change the value of your fourth parameter to true because you're getting the cumulative probability. Okay, so ito, let x denote the number of questions that the student guesses correctly. Then x is a binomial random variable with parameters n is equal to 10 because you have 10 questions and then the probability is 0.5 kasi pwedeng correct or incorrect. The probability sought is P6. Ibig sabihin, yung pang-anim daw na question. Okay? So, the formula gives this. Okay. So, this is the final answer where x is less than or equal to 6. So, this is your probability. If x naman is greater than or equal to 6, lahat ng probability hanggang P10. Okay, the student must guess correctly on at least 60% of the questions, which is 0.60 times 10 is equal to 6 questions. Okay, so if it's greater than 6, then here is the value. Okay, so ito yung formula sa Excel. So ano naman yung solution formula in Excel? Given you have this example, okay, ito yung ating given, ano yung formula natin sa Excel? Okay, so answer that question. Alright, so for our assessment activities, we have engagement activity 5, which is posted dun sa schedule. Tapos yung task performance 5, pagsasamahin ko na lang yung parts 1 and 2. Okay, so that's it for our lesson part 1 ng ating module 5. By the way, our midterm exam is next week, if not the week after next week. Okay, so that's the end of our module 5 part 1. Thank you so much for listening.